Hello, and welcome to Top Story Daily Edition. I'm JNF Editor-in-Chief Jonathan Tobin. Thanks for joining me for another discussion on the most pressing issues in the Jewish world. Please like, subscribe, and give us good reviews when you listen to the show. Now let's get started. Ideas that reduce complex problems into simple mantras are always popular. But those that cloak a political ideology in this sort of language and symbolism in sync with the cultural fashions of the moment and allow people to imagine themselves on the right side of history can spawn world-changing movements. When young people especially are indoctrinated with such notions, the idea of correcting a historical wrong, the results can produce the shocking surge of anti-Semitism that's unfolding right now on U.S. college campuses. The spectacle of a critical mass of this current generation of American college students, egged on by many of their professors and even administrators, chanting slogans about erasing the state of Israel from the map, from the river to the sea, cheering on Islamist terror against Jews everywhere, Intifada revolution, and globalize the Intifada, and speaking openly about banning the presence of Zionists from their midst, if not condoning violence against them, has shaken many Americans. That is especially true for liberal Jews and others who believe that anti-Semitism is primarily, if not solely, a problem on the political right. Yet the most important part of this story is what hasn't happened. Instead of a united nation responding to these expressions of hate and bigotry with one voice, many declarations are being heard in defense of what are, for all intents and purposes, a burgeoning mass movement supporting the Hamas terrorist movement that carried out the manifold atrocities in southern Israel on October 7th. How is it possible for what is supposed to be the best and brightest of American students, those who attend Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Cornell, and many other elite universities, where the pro-Palestine protests have sprung up, to embrace such a profoundly evil cause? The simple answer for what should be seen as responsible points to the intellectual fashion of the day, which, for lack of a better term, we are forced to call woke ideologies. The toxic ideas of critical race theory and intersectionality, which teach that the world is permanently divided between white oppressors and people of color who are their victims, have decided that Israel and the Jews belong to the former, and Hamas and its massive Palestinian supporters are among the latter. These ideas have been mainstreamed of late in America's educational system and culture. Since the moral panic about race that occurred in the Black Lives Matter summer after a Minneapolis police officer killed George Floyd in May 2020, they have become the new orthodoxy against which dissent is not permitted in U.S. leading institutions. While some of us have been pointing out for years that the BLM movement and the ideas behind it grant a permission slip for anti-Semitism, this has only become obvious to most people in the last 6 months. To the horror of many Jews, the largest mass slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust didn't engender sympathy for Israel or the Jewish people. Instead, it provided the spark for a surge in anti-Semitism around the world almost immediately after October 7th. Many Jews believe that they could always count on enlightened liberal opinion in this country, not only to condemn expressions of right-wing Jew hatred in the strongest terms, but to also isolate it. Instead, they have watched with amazement and concerns as the mobs engaging in anti-Semitic invective have been defended or rationalized in mainstream liberal media, like the New York Times and MSNBC, as idealists, or at worst, emotional kids whose actions are an understandable reaction to Israeli atrocities. In doing so, those who are taking this line aren't just repeating and spreading Hamas propaganda and falsehoods. They are accepting the premise that opposition to the existence of the one Jewish state on the planet is somehow the natural political position of those who call themselves progressives. Indeed, much like the BLM riots that wreaked havoc in American cities in the summer of 2020, the campus protests are being described as mostly peaceful. The narrative about the campus mobs in much of the corporate media is that they are merely pro-Palestine and that any anti-Semitism is merely the excessive behavior of a few marginal people who don't represent the true spirit of the protests. Almost as troubling is the fact that even when the anti-Semitic nature of the protests is recognized, the core problem is ignored. It's not just that those taking part are engaging in demonstrations where Israel and its supporters are demonized, Jewish rights erased, and Jews are being threatened. It's that the people doing this don't think they are wrong. They're convinced that they're speaking up for a righteous cause. Not only is that false premise being reinforced by mainstream press coverage, it is also being upheld by leaders of the political left. Indeed, the most outrageous example of that didn't come from Representative Ilhan Omar of the Congressional Left-Wing Squad, who is notorious for her own anti-Semitic statements, and who showed up on the Columbia campus this week to show solidarity with the pro-Palestine mob in the company of her daughter, a student at Barnard College who has been suspended for her role in violating the school's rules. The best encouragement the students received was from President Joe Biden, who, when asked about anti-Semitism on college campuses, condemned it, but then added that he was just as concerned about those who don't understand what's going on with the Palestinians. It was, as Alan Dershowitz and Andrew Stein wrote in the Wall Street Journal, a very fine people moment for the president. That referenced the infamous claim that former President Donald Trump had said that there were some very fine people among those who gathered in Charlottesville, Virginia in August 2017 for the neo-Nazi Unite the rally. Of course, Trump didn't say that since he was referencing those who opposed taking down Confederate statues and not Nazis or members of the Ku Klux Klan. While that distinction was ignored in the media scramble to condemn Trump, Biden is largely getting a pass for his own effort to treat the cause that the anti-Semitic agitators are supporting as valid. The point being is that much of the media and leftist opinion are treating those yelling slurs at Jews as very fine people who are going just a little too far in their advocacy. In the wake of Columbia University President Minouche Shafiq's ambivalence about enforcing the school's rules against his illegal demonstrations and hate speech, the narrative in the liberal media has again flipped, with the New York Times concentrating on what they see as a wrong-headed decision to call in the New York City Police Department to remove the pro-Hamas encampment, though the tents were returned the next day. Indeed, the paper's urban affairs columnist, Gia Bellante, wrote that the main problem isn't campus anti-Semitism, but the willingness of administrators to punish the anti-Semites, who she and those reporting in the news section analogized to the anti-Vietnam War and anti-South African apartheid demonstrators of the past. What is lacking in the coverage and most of the discourse is that, as interviews with them show, most of the students, even at a school like Columbia, can't really explain why they are against Israel except by mindlessly repeating slogans about racism and oppression that have nothing to do with the facts on the ground in the Middle East or patent falsehoods about genocide in Gaza. They don't know the history of the conflict and seem to think that Israelis and Jews are, as Palestinian propagandists claim, settler colonialists in the one country in the world where Jews are, in fact, the indigenous people. Their demands for university divestment from Israel are based on intersectional ideology, in which the century-old Arab war to deny Jewish rights is falsely depicted as analogous to the civil rights movement in the United States. The ignorance of these young adults is pathetic, as is their absurd cosplaying, in which the wearing of keffiyehs has become campus terrorist chic. Lacking their own strong identity, they are adopting one that they perceive will give them some cachet as supporters of an embattled, though fashionable, cause. But having been spoon-fed the same lies that spawned the BLM movement throughout their educational experience, in which anti-Semitism has been redefined as progressivism, no one should be surprised by any of this. Nor should we accept the claim that they are merely demonstrating sympathy for Palestinians or shock at human rights violations. Far greater losses of life in wars in the Congo or Sudan and an actual genocide in Western China where Beijing has put an estimated 1 million Muslim Uyghurs in concentration camps, haven't moved them to utter a single word. If they were really for peace, or the theoretical cause of a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they would be in favor of eradicating Hamas, which is opposed to any peace that doesn't involve the destruction of Israel and the genocide of its people. The sad truth is that massive numbers of students at elite schools and elsewhere have been taught to adopt the Hamas charter, whether they understand what they are supporting or not. If you think that Zionism, the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, is racism, you are denying rights to Jews that no one would think to deny to anyone else. That is anti-Semitism. If you are advocating for a ceasefire that would allow Hamas to get away with mass murder, you are supporting Hamas. And if you think Israel is illegitimate and should be destroyed, you are also supporting Hamas terrorists and their genocidal plans and actions. People who advocate for hateful ideologies, whether they are directed at African Americans, Jews, or anyone else, have a First Amendment right to express their views. But they don't have a right to be tolerated in educational institutions or treated as principal dissenters in the Times. We all know that there is zero tolerance for neo-Nazis or other right-wing extremist Jew haters in American universities or in the liberal media. But because these institutions have been captured by woke ideologues and mainstream politicians like Biden fear their wrath, their moral equivalents on the left, demonstrating on college campuses to free Palestine, are tolerated, rationalized, excused, and even lauded as heroes. In doing so, we are being asked to tolerate the intolerable. To be pro-Palestine today is not to stand up for oppressed people. To the contrary, it is an expression of solidarity with latter-day Nazis and a willingness to mainstream hatred of the Jewish people, not just Israeli policies. But to condemn them is not enough. The only way to explain what has happened and to do something about it is to roll back the woke tide and purge schools, cultural institutions, and the mainstream media of those spreading racialist ideas that foment this toxic hatred. Until the progressive ideas at the heart of the problem are dismantled, all the hand-wringing and expressions of concern about campus anti-Semitism will be meaningless. Thanks for listening. Please remember to tune in every day for Top Story Daily Edition and every week for the full hour-long JNS TV program. Whether you're listening to us on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, or any of the other podcast platforms, or on the JNS YouTube channel, please like and or subscribe to Top Story. Click on the bell for notifications and give us good reviews. Please write to us at editor@jns.org and let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. And remember, keep reading and thinking for yourself.